webinar in the COVID-19 educational series. The need for continued access to knowledge and dissemination has never been so important. We recognize our role in this and we are working towards capacity building of the medical fraternity. The COVID 19 pandemic makes us vividly aware of the major global imbalances and challenges that we collectively face today. So, may I now please call upon Dr. Sandeep Bhalla, Associate Vice President, ECHO India, to start the session today and by welcoming the guests. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Bhalla.
Thank you. Very good evening to all the leaders, those who have joined today in our COVID educational webinar series. All my medical colleagues, those who have joined from the various parts of our globe today for this educational series. Let me tell you that we started this process of disseminating the knowledge to all our medical fraternity and other healthcare professionals since last 1 month. And today is the 12th session of the series continuously going on. And we are lucky to have Dr. Sanjay Kalra sir again along with us. Before I should introduce to all my senior colleagues, those who have joined, let me give you the brief about where we all stand today. These last few weeks have been amongst the most harrowing and desperate for all of us in India, as we have been battling with the deadly second wave of COVID. And now in majority of the states, it has started coming down. The devastating second wave of COVID in India appears to have turned a corner as this wave of COVID-19 continues to recede in all the states. India reported more than 1 lakh new coronavirus infections in the last 24 hours, according to the data by the ministry. Within this, the cumulative count of cases has now gone up to 22 crores 89 lakhs in India itself. A total of 2,427 fatalities being reported in a span of 24 hours. The number of people who have recuperated from the disease has climbed to 1 crore 86 lakhs, while the case fatality was recorded at 1.09% according to the ministry data. The number of people with the case fatality rate was recorded at around 1.2%. As India battles with this huge crisis, we at ECHO India feels that deeply value the role of this such type of educational series. ECHO being extension for community health outcome organization, which started its journey in 2003 with the ECHO project under the leadership of Professor Sanjeev Arora, and as a hub and spoke model. In 2008, they put it up a trust in India also. And we are working extensively in all the states and various, in the private sector, in the corporate sector, for capacity building arena, not only in health sector, but also in education as well as in livelihood. For this particular series, we are really thankful to SBI Foundation, who has given us this opportunity to continue with that. As we are aware that the immune system requires the support of many nutrients, it is recommended to consume a variety of foods for a healthy and a balanced diet, including whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and animal sources, foods that will help us to prevent catching the COVID-19 and getting a good immunity. It has also been observed that at times we seem to be over-investigating when it comes to COVID-19. Yesterday, if you see that our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Modi ji, has announced that vaccination will be made available free for 18 plus category, as well as states will no longer have to procure vaccines from the manufacturers. Major changes in Indian vaccine policy set by the center, with now vaccine supplies to all the state free of cost. Although the private hospitals will continue to procure doses on their own, private hospitals can charge a maximum of rupees 150 over and above the base price of each dose of any vaccine. These are the new guidelines for the vaccination which has come up. State governments will have to monitor this. The National Institute of Virology, Pune, has detected a new COVID variant B1128.2 through a genome sequences of samples from the international travelers from UK and Brazil to India, and the new variant is likely to cause various symptoms. Today, we have kept a special session, and this session is going to be moderated by none other than but Dr. Sanjay Kalra sir, with whom we are having two very eminent subject matter experts also. And the title of this session is going to be Nutrition and COVID-19 Prevention and Rational Investigation of COVID-19. Dr. Kalra is an endocrinologist based at Bharti Hospital, Karnal, India. An avid researcher, writer, and busy clinician. He is also the visiting professor of AIIMS Rishikesh and immediate past president, Endocrine Society of India. He is the vice president of SAFES, that is South Asian Federation of Endocrine Society, and also the education editor of International Society of Endocrinology and deputy chair of Advocacy and Partnership Working Group, IAC. Along with that, we have very two eminent speakers today with us, and they are none other than, but we have people like Dr. Shilpa Joshi. Madam Shilpa Joshi is the Director, Mumbai Diet and Health Center, practicing dietitian. Vice President of Indian Dietetic Association, Honorary Secretary of All India Association of Advancing Research in Obesity, Master Trainer of Diabetes Conversion MAP, Co-Director of National Diabetes Educator Program, which they are organizing in collaboration with Dr. Moon's Diabetes Academy, and presented at VSC has presented various public papers in various national and international meetings. And she's also the runner-up of the recipient of Wim Wemper Gonecum International Essay Award of the Academy of Nutrition, Foundation of Malnutrition. Thank you, madam, for joining this particular series. We have another senior colleague along with us, and that is Dr. Jatin Ahuja. Dr. Ahuja is a consultant infectious diseases in Indraprastha Apollo Hospital, trained in transplant ID in UHN, the largest adult organ transplant program in North America. Currently consultant in Department of Infectious Diseases at Apollo Hospital, contributed in formulating antimicrobial guidelines and app based on antimicrobial policy names daily. Vast experience in working in the field of internal medicine and certified trained in 2D echocardiography, endoscopy, and colonoscopy. I'll stop here and I will hand it over to my senior colleague, senior leader, Sanjay Kalra, with whom I have been associated more than a decade. And I started my capacity building journey under his leadership, and all of you, and even Dr. Joshi, Dr. Shashank Joshi sir, also one of our eminent endocrinologists, and Shilpa Joshi madam is the wife of Dr. Shashank Joshi. And these are all colleagues with whom we started this journey, and now I'm handing over to them to take us on the today's journey. Over to you, Dr. Kalra sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bhalla, and thank you, Eco India, for giving us this opportunity to meet each other and to meet with friends and colleagues from across the world. We know that we are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of discussion is going on around medication, around oxygen, around surgical treatment now also for mucormycosis. But sometimes it's good to revisit the basics, to start right from the very beginning. It's also good to talk about prevention of disease, and it's good to talk about promotion of health. That's why we have with us two experts, Shilpa Joshi and Dr. Jatin Ahuja, who will be speaking to us about their subjects that they have expertise in. Let's see how we can use their expertise, use their knowledge to fight the COVID pandemic in a much better, in a more efficient manner. We'll talk of science, we'll talk of nutrition, we'll also talk of economy, we'll talk of parsimony today. So let's begin with Shilpa ji. Madam, what's nutrition? So many times we read from Greek literature, we read from Indian literature that food is medicine, nutrition is medicine. Is this actually true?
So first of all, good evening, everybody. Food is indeed a medicine, but one has to understand that it is not like a therapeutic medicine where you take a dose today and you will be fine tomorrow. So for example, very weird example for a medical fraternity, but you take paracetamol and your fever comes down. It's like an immediate action reaction kind of process. Whereas food is a medicine which acts over a very long period of time. It's a very long acting drug, but it does have medicinal value. So there are certain things which have shown to have higher medicinal value as compared to others. So just a very example which comes to my mind offhand is use of fiber from various nutritional elements. For example, whether it is isapcol or whether it is methi seeds to bring down postprandial glycemia in people or to control hunger pangs, to control weight. But again, these are very far and few where the effect is immediate. What nutrition actually does is gives you a long-standing improvement in health. Thereby, there is a reduction of symptoms of a particular disease.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Jatin, Madam has set the ball rolling. So nutrition is important for health. You can use specific nutrients or specific functional foods to improve health. But when you are managing your patients in the ICU, Dr. Ahuja, do you check for nutrition? Are there any simple biochemical parameters that you use to check if the patient is well nourished or not? Whether it's speaking about albumin, whether it's speaking about micronutrients, how often do you do these tests, Dr. Jatin?
You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kalra, and thank you, Eco India team. So nutrients definitely, as Madam told, play a vital role apart from the routine medication which we give in our critical care patients. Basically, when patient comes to in our medical facility, we need to assess in a comprehensive way, starting from the basic physical examination, whether the patient has certain kind of glossitis or any cheilitis feature, to look for any vitamin deficiency, any kind of pallor in the conjunctiva or in the tongue. And apart from that, looking signs of the koilonychia over the nails. And then comes to the routine investigations to look for the iron profile studies, whether there is a iron deficiency anemia or they're not, some sort of vitamin B12 or other vitamin D deficiencies there or not. If that is the scene, definitely we need to supplement it. Basically from the, from the first day, if we find these kind of symptoms. But yes, patients who are on the long-term ICU care settings, those are the one who require the essential nutrients requirement in the form of whether it's amino acids or in the form of micronutrients. Then we, based on the patient to patient, we have to supplement those nutrients.
So I think a very strong take-home message we are getting from Dr. Jatin, and that is that when you are talking of investigations, the first line investigation is a clinical examination. You look for signs, you look for stigmata of macronutrient sufficiency or deficiency. You also look for signs of micronutrient sufficiency or deficiency. When you're looking at macronutrients, you classify them as proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. When you're looking at micronutrients, you can classify them overall as vitamins and minerals. So let's continue with this discussion. Dr. Jatin, you spoke that various investigations can be done. In your setup, in the ICU setup or in the ward, when you have patients with COVID-19, which is the commonest macronutrient deficiency that you see? Is it carbohydrate, is it fat, or is it protein?
Basically, any critical care patients, those who have the high catabolic rate, or catabolism is too fast. So those are the one which we commonly find is the albumin, which is you will see that it's a fall in the albumin or hypoalbuminemia. So protein metabolism turnover becomes a little bit on the higher side. So in that case, if there is a hypoalbuminemia, then it means that the body is in the catabolic state. In that case, we have to supplement it in nutritional point of view. From the best route is always the enteral route. So we can, if the patient is able to take, then the enteral route. If not, then by the through the rice tube or supplementation, or then by later on by the, if not, then the parenteral route. So that is the way we can supplement the protein part. And then second thing is the carbohydrate. Carbohydrate deficiency usually less commonly been seen because always patient is either in the form of a dextrose infusion or ringer lactate infusion. So that is usually less commonly seen, encountered. But yes, protein deficiency and the fat, loss of fat, buccal fat, those who are on the chronic care in the ICU, loss of temporal fat, and these are the commonly seen in the critical care settings. The patient is one on the long-term settings over the period of days.
So, Shilpa ji, we have this understanding now that food is important. And actually, when a patient comes in with COVID, this is when he or she actually needs the best possible support from nutrition. It's at that time we find ourselves lacking. We'll talk about micronutrients later, but even in macronutrients, we find that protein deficiency or albumin deficiency is common. We find that there may be carbohydrate deficiency also. Because let us say, even if you put a patient on 5% dextrose, each bottle will have 25 grams of glucose. Even if you give a let's say 4 bottles, that's a total of 100 grams of glucose. That is just barely enough. That is how much? 400 calories, 400 isn't it?
Calories.
400 calories. That's not even enough to prevent catabolism in a normal person. What to speak of a person who has to fight COVID-19? And the patient is going to go into starvation ketosis if you're giving less than 100 grams of carbs per day. So let's talk about nutrition. How can we build ourselves up from a nutrition point of view? And could you take this in two parts first? First of all, immunity. In general, how do we eat healthy food, which helps us build our immunity? And then after that, could you focus on proteins, first of all?
So thank you, Dr. Karla. See, the main thing what we have to understand is that Indian diets, though, everybody claims that they are very well-rounded, there is certain innate kind of problems with Indian diet. The first and most glaring problem is lack of protein. So most of our foods eaten most of the time have very few protein sources, and vegetarianism adds to the problem. I am not a proponent of non-vegetarianism, don't get me wrong, but whatever said and done, non-vegetarian foods are richer source of protein, or animal-based foods are richer source of protein as compared to plant-based sources. If plant-based sources are consumed, non-cereal protein, because cereal protein lacks in many essential amino acids, therefore non-cereal protein, which primarily comes from pulses or which comes from milk and milk products. If you're not a vegan and you can eat milk and milk products, then all of those are very, very important to be included in the diet. Now, very practically, because I'm a dietitian, I look at practicalities of the nutrition problem. It is very important to tell the patient, I mean, that's what I tell my patients is, whenever you get to eat something, first ask, where is the protein? And if you can't find it, you have to get it on your plate. And this is the example which I always give, that lunch, dinner might have a dal or a sprout or a pulse or something, but breakfast is one place in Indian diets where there is no protein. People are busy eating aloo parathas or poha upma or idli dosa, and they're not eating protein with it. And that's the first meal of the day. I think a lot of doctors eat this and go and treat their COVID patients maybe or other patients, and their diets are also lacking proteins. So it's imperative that you have protein. Another end of the spectrum is there are people who eat only proteins and try to go on a ketogenic high protein diet and do not eat carbs. So therefore, these people again feel lethargy, feel tiredness. So I think both the ends of the spectrum is not right. What is required is a very prudent distribution of carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And the distribution that is recommended globally is 50 to 55% calories coming from carbohydrates, 15 to 20% calories coming from protein, and remaining 30% coming from fat, and fat coming especially from non-visible sources. So rather than using your oils and ghee to cook, a lot of oil and ghee to cook, it is prudent to use a lot of nuts and oil seeds in your diets, which are invisible sources of fat, but at the same time, they are very good sources of protein and fiber both. So we talk so much about Mediterranean diet nowadays and prevention of lot of metabolic issues, maybe diabetes, heart disease, so on and so forth. All these issues, if you look at Mediterranean diet in its totality, you will find that there is very high consumption of both legumes and nuts and oilseeds. A lot of emphasis on consumption of fresh vegetables and fruit. I know that with lockdown, getting fresh vegetable and fruit, especially in a city of Mumbai where I live, is difficult because you only have so much time to shop and so on and so forth. But whatever you can get through this route, I think this is the best nutrition that you can offer. So I think all of us should follow the plate method of eating, wherein you are dividing your plate into 4 equal parts: 1/4 of raw veggies, 1/4 of cooked veggies, 1/4 of protein, and just 1/4 of carbs. I think that goes a long way.
Thank you. So we have a fair understanding of where we may be going wrong in our diet and what we should do to improve, how we should improve the immune content or the immunomodulatory content of our diet, also the protein content. Dr. Jatin, when you see patients with COVID-19, the ones who come in with mild COVID-19, the ones whom you're seeing in the OPD or on home consultation, what's the status of their appetite, their smell, their taste? What kind of complaints do they share with you, Dr. Jatin?
Patients are those who are having the mild symptoms, and those who are being managed on teleconsultations. They are the one who are having the loss of taste or altered taste, dysgeusia, and altered smell sensation, dysnomia or anosmia like sensation. But those who are in the hospital settings, they don't usually complain of these kind of symptoms. They complain only when they are put up on the antifungal therapy, like voriconazole or posaconazole. They are the one who complained of that there is a change in the taste over the last couple of days. So basically more with the posaconazole and the voriconazole as compared to other antifungals. So this is what we are seeing it on the routine basis. But patients who are moderate to severe illness, if not on the antifungals unless and until it's indicated. So they usually don't complain of the change sensation. So what I mean to say is that patients who have the loss of smell and loss of taste, they are the one who have the very mild or mild symptoms, and they usually don't present to the hospital setting.
Right. So, Dr. Shilpa, what can we do to help such patients? Loss of appetite, loss of taste, loss of smell.
So actually, I just spoke to a COVID patient, post-COVID patient, just before this program. And that's what I was asking her, how was she feeling, while she was having the infection. And she said the biggest problem was that she was so scared. So she was so scared that her RT-PCR came positive and that, her values were off, that she's like, "Waise hi meri bhook ud gayi." I mean, even though I wanted to eat, I would think that if I eat and something happens, what will happen, what will happen to my kids or what will happen to me, and so on and so forth. So I think that is a problem. Like Sir said, loss of taste and smell is also a big problem. And because there is a loss of taste and smell, there is no appetite. Because what is fun in eating if you can't taste what you're eating and you can't smell what you're eating? So I think some things that we use when we talk to such patients is, first of all, try not to eat big meals, try to eat smaller meals, because they are, you can finish them off fast. Use sharper taste, like, using lemon, which is pretty sharp. It cuts out that complete loss of taste. You feel adding salt, extra salt while having loss of taste makes the food very bitter. So try not to add too much salt, because people try to add salt to get some salty flavor in their food. And in the bargain, everything becomes bitter and then they just can't swallow it. So if they're eating, things like dal chawal or poha or upma or anything, we tell them a generous squeeze of lime and very minimal salt. And that actually helps. Sometimes spices help. Now, I don't know how much is it true in North India, but in South and even in Maharashtra, when you have a bad cold, people drink rasam, pepper rasam, and you find that, you are getting water out of all your sinuses. It really helps. And I think this has helped a lot of my patients when I tell them have pepper rasam. Black pepper actually helps you to get that flavor back, and it really helps. So if you don't make South Indian food and don't make pepper rasam, your tomato soup can have pepper or your dal can have pepper, things like that, which actually helps. So spice, which is a functional food, because pepper has pepperin. Pepperin is the functional element. So all these sharp tastes like ginger, maybe garlic if people prefer, these help you to cut off that complete loss of taste from the food. Another thing I wanted to just emphasize, and I think it is slightly out of the context, but people drinking too much kadha. This is something I've observed, that they obsessively drink kadha. Means they drink like by liters and then they get gastritis. Even after taking PPIs, it's not relieved. They perpetually want to throw up, and then that leads to loss of appetite because they're perpetually nauseous, perpetually there is a heartburn. So I think excessive amount of these kadhas, I have nothing against kadhas and I don't know much about kadhas, but what I feel is not having them excessively, maybe 2 cups a day or something, or maybe a ginger tea or whatever, tulsi ki chai, which is fine as long as it's mild. But then excessive things are causing a lot of gastritis in most of the patients, and then they refuse to eat food completely.
Yeah.
So these are few pointers which I tell my patients.
These are very important pointers. Let me paraphrase what Madam has just said. If you are faced with loss of appetite, loss of smell, loss of taste, first of all, don't despair. Don't get upset. Don't get sad. Present food to the patient in small plates, smaller size cutlery, smaller size crockery. That actually helps. Whenever you are cutting something, let's say you are presenting watermelon or melon or mango, slice or dice it into small pieces. The same way you would do for a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old child. When you're weaning a child, you don't give huge size mangoes and potatoes to that child. You give small bits and pieces. Do the same for a patient who has COVID. That's one message we got. The second message we got was don't overdo on salt. However, do use all the spices that are available in the Indian kitchen. And the Indian kitchen, we are so blessed by God with so many spices. So whatever is available in your part of the country, whatever you are fond of, use that. It can be lemon, lime, it can be ginger, it can be pepper rasam. Here in Haryana, one of our favorites is hing, asafoetida. So these are spices that, they will play with the taste, also with the smell. Wasabi peas are there if you can get them. That is a Japanese spice. Maybe Shilpa will speak more about wasabi and how you can use it in cooking. But now let's say if it's a 40 or 50-year-old lady coming to my clinic or asking for help, I will suggest hing to her. If it is a 25-year-old girl who has just begun cooking at home, she will not be very well versed with hing or asafoetida. Then I would be safer off talking to her about ginger. If it's an, yeah.
Sorry, sir. When you said wasabi, I realized umami flavor is a flavor which actually helps. So, the flavor of Ajinomoto is umami,
Yes.
or flavor of soya. That's where your wasabi is also coming.
Yes.
And so a lot of people love hot and sour Chinese soup, yeah. All of those. So I think sometimes those help as well.
Yeah. And if you have a younger boy, let's say 18 or 22-year-old boy, if I tell him hing or asafoetida, he will stare at me as if COVID has entered my gray matter. But if I tell him oregano or we tell him Ajinomoto, then he is happy with life. So look at the age, look at the demography, look at the various factors of your patient, and you suggest the right spice to that particular patient. So spice up your patient's plate, and actually the patient will be able to have a happier recovery and convalescence with COVID. We do have lots of questions now related to this, and Dr. Mayura Behle says renal failure patients with COVID. How do we deal with them? So one major issue is appetite in renal failure. We've handled that. But Dr. Jatin, would you like to speak about investigations in renal failure? And maybe would you like to mention a few drugs that are contraindicated in renal failure, which we should not be using in terms of COVID and complications?
So, sir, renal failure, first of all, we would like to determine whether it's a acute renal injury is there or it's a chronic kidney disease. If it's a chronic kidney disease, we need to know the stage of the disease, whether it's an stage 1, stage 5, and if there is based on the GFR calculation, if the GFR is less than 30, usually it has been said that remdesivir should be avoided. So remdesivir is one of the drugs which should be avoided if the estimate GFR is less than 30. Though in some centers it has been tried and it's been given also, but the data is less promising in terms of GFR is less than 30 is there. One thing. Second thing is that CKD patients are already immunocompromised patients, and the underlying inflammation is already is high. So if we look at the baseline parameters of the CKD patient, there may be possibility that the certain inflammatory markers like ESR and CRP or it's a IL-6, they might be raised from the baseline itself. So patients who are even having the mild disease from the starting itself, they may appear a pseudo rise in the inflammatory markers. So that is one thing. Second thing is that management part, as far as management part is concerned, the patients, those who are having the mild disease, based on the symptoms, based on the oxygen parameters, based on the CT score, they should be managed at home, but we manage for the other patients. But if you talk about the moderate to severe categories, yes, they should be managed in the hospital settings with the due precautions, considering the whether to use the steroids and how long to be used it. And yes, one very important thing which I like to highlight is the ferritin levels. CKD patients, they are already having the baseline ferritin levels on the higher side. And as we know from the recent past few weeks that the ferritin is one of the requirements for the COVID-associated mucormycosis, high ferritin level. So those are the ones should also be cautious enough to be, sugar level should be under control, and the rest of the part to be taken as general.
Yeah. So this question was on renal failure. Let's highlight two things which Dr. Jatin said. Number one, remdesivir dose or use is, you will decide according to eGFR, not according to serum creatinine. Do remember that if you have a 20-year-old gentleman with a serum creatinine of 1.2, his eGFR will be fine. But if it is an 80-year-old lady whose serum creatinine is 1.2, her eGFR might actually be below 30. So look at the age of the patient also. And if you have a geriatric patient, serum creatinine is on the higher side, do an eGFR first before deciding how to treat and what to do. The second thing you spoke about was ferritin, right? And that brings us from macronutrients to micronutrients. So if we could go back to Shilpa, we spoke of protein, which was a macronutrient. Let's talk about micronutrients now. Let's first focus on vitamins. And Leela Varki says, she asks a question, and this question is valid. Does the temperature and method of cooking matter, especially for proteins and also for vitamins? So could you take this together? To unmute, please.
Sorry. So we all know that water-soluble vitamins are very heat sensitive. Even fat-soluble vitamins, they are less heat sensitive, but that does not mean they are heat insensitive. So overcooking, you know, that is the hallmark of Indian cooking is overcooking. मतलब जब तक उसका पूरा भरता नहीं बन जाता, we cook everything. So I think that is something that we need to work on. So instead of overcooking, use methods like soaking, sprouting. These improve the micronutrient content of the food, and then just cook. So you know, we always talk about vitamin D fortification in milk. So even the milk which is fortified with vitamin D, Indians get it at home and boil it 2,500 times in one day. And then all that added vitamin D is destroyed right in your house, and you're buying milk for higher rate. So I think that is something that we need to understand, and therefore eating something raw every day, whether it is in form of a salad, whether it is in form of a fruit, is very important to ensure that you get all the vitamin Bs and vitamin C. So when you are using lime, do not heat the food after lime is added to it. खाने को थाली में लो and then squeeze the lime on top. Or you want to add tomatoes as a source of vitamin C, then cut the tomato and put it on your plate rather than, you know, making a gravy out of it. So that is very important. Overcooking green leafies, you know, like we do while we make palak paneer, usko paka karke, fir usko mixer mein ghuma karke, that doesn't work. So try to just lightly toss or lightly stir fry these vegetables so that you avail maximum benefit, so that whatever is fat soluble can use the fat for absorption. You can use that fat in that stir fry for absorption. So also remember that fat is not bad. So all the fat that you eat is not bad. Minimum use of fat is very, very important. Don't go fat free. Also, fat actually gives a beautiful taste to food. So while we don't want you to eat fried food, we don't want you to eat fat-free food as well, especially in times like COVID, you know. Lot of times we talk about, you know, because there is COVID, people say, tala hua mat khao, tadke wali cheez mat khao. It doesn't work like that. Don't eat fried, but tadka is very necessary because it just makes your food more palatable. It helps you to, you know, swallow your food. So I think these things are very important. So method of cooking is very important, and various techniques, like I said, soaking, which improves digestibility. Lot of Indians will tell you, lot of your patients must be telling you, dal khate hai to gas hoti hai. Isliye hum dal hi nahi khate. And therefore there is no protein in our diet. So if you soak the dal, phytate content drops, digestibility improves 100-folds. So you can soak dals and eat. Soak them for 4 or 5 hours. Throw the water which has phytates and cook your dal. You will get better, you know, better digestibility. So is in nuts. Lot of people, ideally nuts should be consumed just like that. But if digestibility is a problem, try to soak them and eat. So these things are very, very important. Sprouting increases micronutrient content 1,000-fold. So when your normal pulses are not great source of vitamins, moment you sprout them, they become a rich source of all vitamins, including vitamin E, which is so rarely found in nature. So I think that is very important. Certain vitamins like vitamin B12, vitamin D, they are only present in animal-based food. If you are a vegetarian and a strict vegetarian, or more, you're a vegan, so you don't even consume milk and milk products, then it is imperative that you supplement it. Otherwise, try to get it from the animal sources. And again, when you mean non-veg food is a rich source of vitamin B12, that doesn't mean you have to eat tandoori chicken. That means you have to steam the chicken and eat it to avail vitamin B12. Or fish is a great source of omega-3 fat. You can't have fried fish. You have to have steamed fish, because by the time you fry, omega-3 fat gets fried with your normal frying oil and you get nothing in your hand. So these are some few things. Yeah.
And it flies away into the atmosphere.
Yes.
But these are wonderful tips actually. And many times I see my patients, what they do is they soak their dal, right? That makes it easier for the elderly people in the family to take. And then the water that is left, they use that water to make the dough for their chapati.
Atta.
Atta uske saath gundte hain. So that way you save the water and you also save the nutrients. So that is a very nice thing and we encourage them to do it. If in your OPD, you find any lady, any gentleman doing any kind of a practice, which is good, which is not harmful, where you see that they're making extra effort to take care of their health, their health, their family's health, do appreciate. Take a minute out to appreciate. Like this lady who told me, I soak my dal and then I use that water to make the dough for the day's atta. I said, thank you, madam. I mean, you're doing such a great job. And thank you for taking care of yourself. Thank you for taking care of your family. This way, you are taking care of the entire nation because you're reducing the burden upon the healthcare services. And this actually spreads the good word. But Mayura Behle has another question for you, Shilpa, if you can answer in just one sentence. Cooking in pressure cooker, what does that do to micronutrients?
So what is heat sensitive? Is heat sensitive. So for example, rice is richest source of thiamine when it is raw. Moment it goes in cooker or in kadai, it's gone. By the time you wash it, it's gone. And therefore, you try to get it not from cereal pulses, but you try to get it from vegetable and fruit, which is a richer source, and you can eat them raw or sprouts maybe.
Yeah. Dr. Ahuja, a few questions on nutrition for you now. डॉक्टर जतिन की शक्ल भी ऐसी ऐसा ना बहुत बढ़िया से कुक दिखते हैं घर पे सो Mrs. Ahuja is a very lucky lady. So, Jatin, questions for you. If you handle all difficult patients, tough patients. If a patient is on ventilator and on NG feed, then what do you do, Jatin? In your setup, do you have enteral feeds, parenteral feeds, or how do you decide what to do for someone who's on ventilator?
To be on safer side, we write the dietitian opinion.
Okay,
But
this question was from Hina, so maybe Shilpa would want to take that.
yes, sir.
So if it's an enteral feed, there are a lot of enteral formulas which are available. And the new guidelines say that in enteral feeds, we really do not advise kitchen feeds anymore. So we really do not, when I was a student, we used to actually create kitchen feeds with rice and dal and egg and oil and all of that. Nowadays, the recommendation is you use ready to use enteral formulas. So if it is a nasogastric feed, then it's easy because you can use many enteral formulas. Where if it's directly into NJ feeds, then you only use monomeric feeds, and that's how you manage patients who are on nasogastric feeds.
Do focus on glucose because here you will find that glucose levels are usually high in people with diabetes, and you actually have to struggle. If your patient is on ventilator, and the patient has diabetes, patient has to be on intravenous insulin. There is no role for any other type of treatment. And if the patient is on oxygen therapy, then Dr. Arati Bora says, any specific foods to give someone who is on oxygen?
So, there is this whole thing called as a respiratory quotient of a food. So it is said that carbohydrates have the highest respiratory quotient, and therefore the demand of oxygen when you eat simple high glycemic foods is very high as compared to proteins and fats, which have a lower respiratory quotient. Okay, so this is typically the guidelines. When we studied, there was no COVID. So these were guidelines which were used in asthma. So typically, when people tend to get breathless. So therefore, the role, again, it's the same thing. The role of high protein foods. Because the respiratory quotient is low, you realize people do far better when they eat these kinds of food rather than eating foods which are very high in glycemic index. For example, rice. A lot of people will tell you that when they eat rice, it bothers them more than as compared to maybe millets, which are lower in glycemic index. So something like that. So try to eat foods which are lower in respiratory quotient, which are more protein rich.
Let's revise where we get our proteins from. So, Dr. Jatin, let's look at your plate. I know that you are busy. Many times you don't even get time to have breakfast or lunch. But supposing you were lucky enough to get lunch on a particular day at work, how much of protein is there? So let's revise the sources of protein. Protein can come either from the animal kingdom. It can be egg, it can be meat, chicken, mutton, fish, any kind of non-vegetarian food.
Okay.
Or it can come from milk and dairy products. It can come from milk, cottage cheese, buttermilk or lassi, yogurt. That's the second group. And the third is it can come from pulses and lentils, whether it is any kind of dal or chane or rajma. Recently, I learned from a friend in Uttarakhand, there is something known as bhat ki dal, B-H-A-T-T, bhat, that is black soya bean. And this is grown in the hills of Garhwal, and this has the highest protein content amongst all Indian lentils. So this is something that you can try out in your cuisine. So, but Dr. Jatin, your plate at work or at home, how much of these three groups are there? These three food groups are there?
So starting from I would say since childhood. So I have been from family only. From in the night, the dinner time, I used to have always the dal and the chapati. So that will, I think, that take care of my protein part in the dinner time. Again, I would say in the lunch time, it's both. I need to have the one katori or one sauce of this sabji, and second is of the dal, lentils. And I would talk about in the morning, yes, one paratha or thick bread, and another one is from the either the dal, lentils, or it could be with the big scoop of the malai, the thick malai, yeah, or it could be curd also. So that is how my my cousins goes.
All of us are getting hungry now. The way Jatin
That
is
is how
describing.
I go from the beginning. So I would say since my fourth class, but I remember I haven't changed my this diet plan. So I am following that plan only. And in the meanwhile, I used to take occasionally the egg, and sometimes in the evening time I used to take the sprouts also, or the chana, and it's only. Otherwise, in the morning, sometimes my wife, if she wishes to give, then she can give some dry fruits. Otherwise, if not, then the basic protocol will always be fixed in most of the days.
So that's a good beginning. And Dr. Arati Bora also asked another question about protein requirement for chronic kidney disease and chronic liver disease, or maybe chronic lung disease. So if Shilpa, you could take this question first: protein requirement in kidney disease, lung disease, and liver disease. And then we move on to sort of optimizing Dr. Jatin's plate.
Yeah. So in chronic kidney disease, one needs to be very careful with the protein intake. But I'll tell you what happens really. So I'll tell you a very real scenario. With high levels of creatinine and lowering eGFR, we find that patients are anyway not hungry. So they are nauseous all the time. They have no appetite. And in India, when people don't have appetite, the first thing they don't have appetite is for protein. So when somebody is ill and they say खाने का दिल नहीं है, मतलब दाल नहीं खानी, अंडा नहीं खाना, दूध नहीं पीना, दही चावल खाने हैं, plain चावल खाने हैं, नमक डाल के, that's what people eat. सूखा पराठा खाना है, just dry paratha, nothing else. So therefore, though it is, it's taught to us that in chronic renal failure, you need to give only 0.6 gram protein per kg body weight of a person. I have yet to meet a patient in 20 years of my practice, a patient who does not have chronic kidney disease, also eating 0.6 gram of protein per kg, his or her body weight. Forget in chronic renal failure. So in chronic renal failure, we typically find patients eating protein to the level of 0.3, 0.2 grams per kg body weight. Barely they eat any protein. And so a lot of times I find that we need to increase protein because they are having a lot of loss of lean muscle mass. There's nothing left in them. They are, they're completely sarcopenic. So therefore, in chronic renal failure, 0.6 gram is what is recommended. And I think that till that level, one should give them protein and not go below that, unless if they are on keto analogs or other kind of drugs, where then we reduce them to 0.2 and so on. But that's like really handful of patients. As far as chronic lung disease go, I think role of protein is very important. So if their other parameters are normal, and more specifically creatinine is normal, it is imperative that 0.8 to 1 gram protein per kg body weight should be given, out of which at least half of the protein should come from high biological value. Means animal protein or animal-based protein. Because in India, we do not consider dairy as non-vegetarian. We consider it as vegetarian. So it can be coming from those sources, even in liver disease, as long as the creatinins are normal.
Yeah. Let's revise this and let's go back to Dr. Jatin's plate. Now we want to increase the protein content in that. And I would be quite open admitting that I myself am a pure vegetarian. I know my protein intake is not enough. And then I actually think I'm malnourished. It's difficult to convince people about the need for protein supplementation. But then when you look at the soft and subtle markers of hypoalbuminemia, Dr. Jatin spoke about that right at the very beginning. But let's say somebody has a mild edema, swelling of the feet, swelling over the calves. This might be protein deficiency. Tiredness, easy fatigability, that is protein deficiency. Right? Somebody who says, I go to the gym every day, I exercise, I am just not able to build muscles. That is protein deficiency. That's sarcopenia. So now we don't want that to happen to anybody. So let's go one by one. Let's focus on the breakfast plate. So Dr. Jatin has to have a parantha because he's from Haryana and he can't live without that. That's fine. That's well taken. But what can we add on the side, Shilpa?
So,
protein.
Dr. Ahuja, are you vegetarian?
Yeah. Occasionally I take
eggs. Yeah. Occasional eggs.
So if you're vegetarian, then again, like I said, you can have curd, a bowl of curd, which goes well with paratha. Or if you can, I do not know about Haryana, but in Bombay, you get very good low-fat paneer. You know, it is sold as low-fat, high-protein paneer. A lot of brands have it in Mumbai. So that paratha can be made up of paneer paratha. Yeah, you can have stir-fried paneer on side with the paratha. Or if dono bhi possible nahi, you can have a glass of milk if you're not lactose intolerant. Or then if you're a non-vegetarian, you can have a couple of egg whites or at least one egg. And I do not think one egg is a crime. You know, if one egg is eaten with yellow, I mean, a lot of people think that, you know, egg yellow kha liya bahut problem hai. I do not think that is a problem, even with somebody having high cholesterol, because 200 milligrams of cholesterol doesn't do anything. So maybe one egg, or if one is not very comfortable eating whole egg, a couple of egg whites. But something, or sprouts, I do not know how much of it is eaten, but in Maharashtra, we have a dish called as usad, means we sprout moong, aur usko tadka laga ke, it's made like a sabzi. And if you have heard a dish called as misal pav, the base of that misal pav is this sprouts. So that is something that you can eat, but definitely one should not just eat a paratha or just a poha or just a upma or just a slice of bread. That is the most common on-run breakfast. 2 slices of bread, butter lagaya, jam lagaya, or kha liya. So if you want to eat bread, bread should not be eaten. But if you want to eat bread, then eat it with peanut butter or almond butter. ये सब आजकल बहुत easily मिल जाता है. Or you can eat with a slice of cheese or paneer or something like that, but you need to eat that.
So you can counsel your patient. We have these questions from Dr. Jamuna Rani coming that COVID positive patients, can they eat more spicy food? The answer is yes, because actually it helps in appetite. Why is oral ulceration more frequent in COVID positive patients? Because of micronutrient deficiency, vitamin B deficiency. They're not eating properly. And another question is, why do, again from Dr. Jamuna, why do people have a craving for spicy or sweetened food? Actually, the message is coming from the hypothalamus. It is actually a way of telling the body that we need more nutrients. That is what the brain is telling. So now coming back to that plate, either you can change the parantha. You can put paneer or dal inside the parantha. You can have a dal parantha instead of having a plain parantha. You can have a paneer parantha. On top of the parantha, you can put a fried egg or an egg. Or you can boil the egg and just cut slices and have that. You can also make a French parantha, just like you make a French toast. So bread alone may be a crime, but bread dipped in egg, that will give you protein. And you can dip your parantha in egg also, right? In fact, if you want to use leftovers from the previous day, then this is a very tasty way of actually eating the previous day's paranthas.
Your wife was very happy.
You like
your wife was...
These are secrets, actually. We shouldn't be telling anybody, isn't it, Jatin? By now, I guess everybody in the audience would have realized that I just love teasing Jatin. And he's my junior from college. So this is ragging time going on. You can also on the side take yogurt or curd. And if you happen to be in a metro where you can buy Greek yogurt, then Shilpa, what's Greek yogurt and is that better? And let's say it costs double my normal cost of yogurt. Is it worthwhile
So
spending
Greek
double the
yogurt
money?
has a very specific microflora. So see, each curd is defined by the microflora that it has, and therefore the basal fermentation products that it gives are different. So the only difference in Greek yogurt is there is a different kind of flora, and therefore the yogurt is very thick. So if you have ever eaten Greek yogurt, you virtually feel like you are eating frozen yogurt. It's like an ice cream. It's so thick. It comes on your plate. The whey quantity is very minimum. So it's more enjoyable. Baki kuch nahi hai. It's just you're paying 4 times the price for the same thing. So you can have your dahi and that's good enough. And usko hang kar dena. You know, that's a very nice idea. So you can take dahi, put it in a muslin cloth. Usko बांध देना, उसके नीचे put a bartan. The way that you collect can be made into used to make atta या liquefy your dal. और जो ऊपर जो दही बच जाता है, that's really thick. So you can spread it on bread if you have to eat, but you can spread it on a paratha like cream cheese. It tastes really, really nice. And you can do it overnight. You can keep that hanging inside your fridge and keep a tray down and you can collect whey. It's very tasty.
So super healthy ideas coming for breakfast. But let's move on to other questions which we have. So Mehruk Ishfaq Sahab asks, Dr. Jatin, this question is for you. Most of the sources tell us that black fungus is associated with COVID, also with new COVID variants, and also with hyperglycemia. So how much is this true? What are the causes of black fungus? If you could just 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. And then what is the diet that we would give to somebody with mucor or at high risk of mucor?
Thank you, Maruf. And thank you, sir. Sir, this is, first of all, from this platform, I would like to, emphasize that black fungus is not equivalent to mucormycosis, sir. So which we are seeing these days is the mucormycosis. And the hyphae of the mucormycosis, or you can say the wall of the mucormycosis, they are non-pigmented. We have the separate fungus in our, mycology, which we say diatomaceous fungi or pigmented fungi. There we can say that they are the black fungus. In this, when they call the mucormycosis, they have the tendency to cause necrosis in the tissue. That leads to the blackish appearance, necrotic black part. That has been, the people have labeled it as a black fungi, though it's nothing to do with the particular about the mucormycosis. Coming on to the, is this variant is responsible for the mucormycosis? To some extent, I would say it could be one of the possibility, because since in the last, first wave, we haven't seen such large number of the mucormycosis, though we have seen few cases, but it's very few numbers. And steroids already been used in the last time also and been used this year also. But since the large number of patients being infected this time, one factor is that. Second factor is steroids have been, used at home at this point, at this second wave, and people are using it there, without monitoring the blood sugar. Second point is that also, and third point is that the use of the oxygen without changing the humidifier. That is one of the factor at home. So all these factors contributing to the development of the mucormycosis. And another thing is that COVID itself is an inflammatory state, and by inflammation it rises the acute phase reactant, that is ferritin. And as we all know that for the mucor to grow, we require the ferritin level, iron, Fe2+. So that is already been provided by the our vitamin C. We take vitamin C, which causes more iron absorption. Our COVID causes hyperferritinemia. Zinc, again, a part of the nutrient, we are giving it. So all these clubbed together leading to development of a CAM, COVID-associated mucormycosis. Or we can also say COVID treatment-associated mucormycosis.
Yeah. And Dr. Leela Varki wants to help you out, Dr. Jatin. So just like when you were in AIIMS Delhi and you got those guest papers for your exam. So she says to you, in terms of micronutrients, why don't you discuss zinc supplements? Is there such a thing as zinc toxicity?
So yes, sir. I already mentioned that zinc is also one of the requirement for the enzymes that already, I think one is the iron permease, the enzyme responsible for the conversion of the Fe2+ to Fe3+, and that also requires the zinc. So zinc somewhere playing a role in some extent of the development of mucormycosis. Although mucor is a ubiquitous organism already present in our environment, and we keep on inhaling and exhaling out, just taking the swab from the nostril and looking at the hyphae or the growth of the mucor in that plate, it doesn't mean that we have the mucormycosis. It has to be tissue invasion. It has to be from the deep tissue. Then only we can say that yes, the mucormycosis has engulfed our sinus area or orbital area. This is what
I think that is important, so that we shouldn't worry too much about this. At the same time, we should be cautious, of course. But just in one line, Shilpa ji, Kavita Sudhakar ji asks, what should be the amount of beverages like tea and coffee? Because in her experience, people with COVID-19 are being asked to avoid them.
I haven't ever come across literature which says that tea and coffee is going to be harmful. But like I said, overconsumption of tea and coffee is not a good thing for anybody. Both speakers are drinking tea, so I should not be saying that. But it should not be taken. They're just drinking 1 cup. So I think if you're taking 1, 2, or 3 cups a day, it's okay. But I don't think you should be taking more than that. Also understand that most of the time teas and coffees give you unnecessary amount of sugar in your diet. Because in India, teas and coffees are typically sweetened. So therefore, if they are unsweetened, maybe 2 or 3 cups a day is okay. And in fact, in tea, you can add a lot of other functional ingredients like ginger and green tea and dalchini and pepper and all of that, and you can create tea.
So actually, supposing someone is addicted to tea, and I think I would place myself maybe in that category. So either you reduce the number of times you are having tea, right? Or you reduce the size of the cup. Or like what I do is I use all these functional foods, like sometimes dalchini, sometimes saunf, so different tastes, and I just keep on playing around with it. And I, at home also, everybody laughs at me. I do have a huge cup of tea or a mug of tea, but it's like black water. It's just the color that's black. You just put the tea bag and take it out immediately. So there's hardly any caffeine in it. So that's another way of playing around. If your patient comes and says, I take 10 cups of tea a day, right? And the patient won't say it. Actually, the spouse or the children are going to come and say, so don't attack immediately. Don't get it down to 0. Just tell these different, patli gali wale raste to sort of find the middle path.
In Mumbai, we call it cutting chai.
Yeah.
Cutting chai is literally 1 sip. It's 1 sip of tea, and hospital mein wo din raat ghoomta rehta hai chai wala cutting leke, taki, you're just having sips in between. I think that's a good, the cutting chai is not good because it's loaded with sugar and whatever. But if you can have cutting size of chai, which is literally 25 to 30 ml, then maybe you can have it a couple of times a day.
Yeah.
Ma'am, in this, I would like to say that tea could be a anti-mucor agent, because vitamin C, if it is without sugar. So vitamin C promoting the iron absorption, and tea with the caffeine inhibiting the iron absorption. So it could be one of the possibility if it's taking without sugar. Yeah.
Tea board should take you up.
Keyboard will take you up. मैं तो खुश हो गया, इतना खुश हो गया, Jatin. You should have told me this earlier. But we have a lot of people logged in with us, and let's continue with happier discussion now. Greetings from Dr. Naresh to Dr. Hemnani Naresh to both of you. And Chaudhary ji asks, is sourdough bread advisable as compared to normal bread? Dr. Shilpa, first you'll have to tell us what is sourdough bread.
So sourdough bread is a bread which is very, very popular in the west coast of United States. So if you go to San Francisco or any of those places, you get everything in a sourdough bread ka bowl. So if it's the soup, you eat the soup and you eat the bowl because it's made from the sourdough bread. Sourdough bread is called sourdough bread because the starter that you use for the bread is sour. So like dahi mein dahi ka starter use karke you make another batch of dahi. वैसे sourdough bread mein you use the dough of the previous batch and make this bread. So it's sour in nature. The pH is lower, means it has a lower pH. And we all know that organic acids reduce glycemic index of the food. And therefore, sourdough bread tends to have lower glycemic index as compared to other white, brown or multigrain breads which are available in the market. And therefore, internationally, sourdough bread is as compared to other breads available in their market, is considered as healthier. So therefore, that is sourdough bread for you.
Okay, so if you are available, if it's available, you are able to source it, then no harm in taking it, right?
आजकल फेसबुक पे बड़े-बड़े कोर्सेज चल रहे हैं sourdough bread बनाने के, इसलिए क्वेश्चन आया है.
Okay, ठीक है. So that's nice. I learned something new. And again, Gail Chaudhary asking, instead of oats porridge, can we use amaranth porridge?
So remember, oats is a grain, amaranth is a pseudo grain. So amaranth is really not a grain, and therefore it has lower amount of carbohydrate or starch as compared to oats. Also, amaranth is more indigenous as compared to oats. Amaranth has been growing in India since BCs, they say. You know, it's very, very old grain. So if you can use amaranth, nothing like it. You also get something called as amaranth puff. It's called lahi. Amaranth ki lahi. If you can use that with milk or with buttermilk and make a porridge, that's much, much healthier than having oats porridge.
Right. We continue to have lots and lots of questions on nutrition, some related to COVID.
Can I just add on to this, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
So just now, this is a little more intricate, but I think this is a very good takeaway. So oats which are available in Indian market are available as white rolled oats. So if you ever go in the market and any brand you buy, they look like poha. They are white in color and they are flat. Remember, these oats are processed because to make them flat, oat grain is not like that. You have to make it flat, you have to roll it. And in the bargain, you increase the glycemic index of that oats. So it becomes high glycemic food. If you really want to eat oats like it is eaten traditionally by Swiss or by English, then you should buy steel cut oats. And steel cut oats look exactly like dalia looks. So you can actually see it as pieces of oats, and then you have to soak it overnight and pressure cook it and eat it. And that's the traditional way of eating oats.
Right. Thank you. We had this question. What is amaranth in Hindi? It is Ramdana or Rajgir. Rajgir or Ramdana. So you can source it from your friendly grocer and try to use it in different ways in cooking. It is also useful for people with celiac disease because it doesn't have any gluten. Dr. Jatin, a question for you. So we are speaking of rational investigations. There is something known as the law of investigative parsimony. Now, Parsis have a lot of money. That is how I remember the meaning of the English word parsimony. Parsimony means using whatever resources you have in the most judicious manner. I am reminded of this novel called Silas Marner, where the author, she describes the lady of the house, and she says the lady of the house was very efficient, very effective. She had a full lunch table. Her table was full, yet not a single grain of salt was wasted in her kitchen. That is the sign of a good lady, a good housewife, a good manager. So similarly, when you are managing patients with COVID-19, there is a law of investigative parsimony. You should get all the investigations done. Otherwise, you won't be able to manage. But those investigations should give you value for money. So a few questions coming up. Should I do vitamin D in everybody with COVID or in routine practice, or can I just supplement with vitamin D routinely in a country like India? What is your take on this, Dr. Jatin?
So, sir, I think it's a rightly asked question. And during this COVID pandemic, vitamin D deficiencies are definitely, yes, it's quite common in our Indian population. But before going for vitamin D, we need to ask the question from the patient. Are you aware of that you are having the vitamin D deficiency in the past? If he or she says, yes, I have taken the supplementation just 1 year back, or it was low and I'm still taking it. So it's better to avoid unnecessary prescription of the vitamin D testing. And if it's not, and there is no history of taking the vitamin D supplementation or vitamin D testing in the past, it's better to test it once, and basically once during patient is going through the COVID illness. And this is what my suggestion is, sir.
So we have this question actually, and that is why we raised it from Dr. Mayuri. If you want to give routine vitamin D doses to children, to adults, you even don't need to test actually. Everybody's at home, everybody is deficient in sunlight. We are a heliophobic nation. Helios is sun. We are heliophobic. Though we have been blessed by the Helios god, we just don't like going out into the sun. If you want to give a mega dose, that is 6 lakh unit stat, then I think the test should be done. You should have a test. Do remember that bioavailability of oral vitamin D is much better than that of intramuscular vitamin D. So even if you want to give a mega dose, you would be better off giving an oral vitamin D every second day or every third day, 60,000 units, instead of giving 6 lakh unit IM at one time. I do use intramuscular injection, vitamin D in my OPD sometimes. That is for patients who ask for an injection. They say, give me an injection. I don't think the tablets are going to work. Then we say, okay, go ahead. It gives a semi-placebo kind of a feeling. Another question, Dr. Jatin, while on investigative parsimony, there are some tests that are being done for everybody with COVID. Let's talk about a few of them. One is CRP, the other one is ferritin, and another one is ESR. What do these have in common with each other? ESR, CRP, ferritin. Are there any other tests which are similar to that?
So
To these?
all these three are inflammatory markers, and basically also known as acute phase reactants. So any inflammation or any acute infection, or the sharp rise is seen in all these three. But if you talk about the recovery phase, once the patient starts recovering it, the ESR is the one which takes a longer time to get back to the normal state. And then second is the ferritin, and the quickest response comes from the CRP, which is the C-reactive protein or carbohydrate reactive protein. So it is the one which, once the disease starts, it starts with the onset of the disease, start rising up. And once the disease starts settling up down, and it starts come back to the normal baseline. The CRP is one of the best marker. And apart from these three markers, two other markers are being, you must have encountered now, the LDH and the IL-6. So LDH is also marker of the disease activity or amount of lung involvement. Basically, when we talk about the COVID scenario. So LDH is also very good marker. And then IL-6, I would say it's a very vague marker. Sometimes the patient of on ventilator with severe COVID has a IL-6 of 20, and patient who is at home a IL-6 of 250. So that is the marker which, that's just like you have said, when you prescribe intramuscular vitamin D as a semi-placebo effect, same I do with my patient. When I write IL-6, that's always on the patient
demand,
request.
if patient is requesting it.
Yeah. Otherwise, IL-6 is not a, I would say, very good marker, because a lot of controversy is coming up with the IL-6. Rest D-dimer is also the marker which we commonly see.
We'll do that separately. Yeah. But can I ask a direct question? We are talking of investigative parsimony. We are talking of reducing the financial burden of COVID-19. Is it correct? And let us ask this question to you and also to one of our panelists who has logged in, Dr. Vinny Kantru. She is a pulmonologist at Apollo New Delhi. The question to both of you, Dr. Jatin and Dr. Vinny. Is it correct that in most patients, I can get away with by just getting a CRP done for screening and monitoring, and I do not necessarily have to do a ferritin, an IL-6 and an LDH, and this will help me save money? Is this correct for the vast majority of patients?
Yes, sir. The statement you have given is absolutely correct, sir.
Yes.
CRP is the single most marker here.
Dr. Vinny, we'll wait for your response on the panel. Yes, sir. So, Dr. Jatin, Dr. Vinny supports you.
Yes, sir.
This is the Shilpa. This is the Apollo New Delhi brigade, the New Delhi Apollo mafia. But that's fine. This is a very strong message actually that we would like to share with all of you. You do not need to get all the tests done, and if you're getting a test done, that's fine. But the test is not. There has to be a reason for getting the test done. Maybe the patient demanded it. So Dr. Jatin got it done. That is fine. We follow what we call the biopsychosocial model of health. If getting a test done makes the psychology happy, it makes sociology, it makes the family happy. The children get a feeling that, yes, I've got the complete test done for my parents, then that's fine. Otherwise, a CRP alone will suffice. Let's move on to other questions. And Dr. Jamuna Rani asks you, Shilpa, are chia seeds helpful for weight loss? And is fasting a good idea, especially in COVID-19 times? So
And
chia seeds are a functional food. Shilpa,
Sorry.
unmute here.
Yeah, I wasn't. So chia seeds are a great source of omega-3 fat, vegetarian form. So it has alpha-linolenic acid, which gets converted to EPA and DHA in our body. So if you're a vegetarian, then the alpha-linolenic acid is all that you can consume. And chia seeds are a rich source of alpha-linolenic acid along with walnuts and flax seeds. So they should be consumed as a part of diet. Also, that chia seeds are a very rich source of fiber. So a lot of times, if you begin your day with a spoonful of chia seeds soaked in water, you find that you're less hungry for breakfast. And that is a way it might help you to feel full. But on its own, chia seeds do not cause weight loss. You have to use it such that, before meals strategically so that it can cause weight loss. That was the first question. Second question was fasting. Now that I didn't understand. You mean while you got COVID, you have to fast, or in general, fasting is good for you?
Both questions are there.
I don't think while you have COVID, you need to fast. You may eat small frequent meals because you are not going to have appetite for bigger meals. And that's important. But if you fast, then you're not going to get your daily dose of protein. You're not going to get your vitamins and minerals, which are required and which are not supplemented otherwise. So I don't think fasting is a great idea while you are having the infection. But in general, what has been shown by the research is fasting is good for you. So fasting is good for you to increase longevity. And now there is a lot of data to show that intermittent fasting or even alternate day fasting is great for weight loss. But long-term trials of 2 years, 3 years are lacking. These are all short-term trials of 6 months to 1 year, where they have shown to be very, very effective. So for longevity, yes, fasting is great, but we do not know what happens of fasting with infections. We don't.
Yeah. The question that was asked also related to the Indian social setup. So if you have a person who has been fasting for ages and ages, let us say there's a gentleman who has breakfast with dawn and he doesn't eat food after dusk for religious reasons or personal reasons. And that person has been doing well for the past 50 years. Now he develops mild COVID. Do not make him change his lifestyle. Do not make him change his diet. His body, his metabolism is already attuned to that. So it's an intermittent fasting. So a Jain gentleman, do not force him to change. Let us say Rosas are going on, Ramzan was going on. Now all the people who wanted to fast, they fasted. And a million reasons were proposed for COVID-19 and COVID-19 severity. But nobody said that you fasted during Ramzan. That is why you got severe COVID. That did not happen because the body is attuned to it. So if there is a social setup which is encouraging fasting, as long as the patient has been used to it earlier, let the patient continue. Supposing I have been doing intermittent fasting earlier, I can continue now. But after developing COVID, after having mild COVID, or let us say you have somebody in the family who has got COVID, you've been exposed. Now that is not a good time for you to begin fasting, right? And now suddenly everybody in the family gets COVID, and then you say, I want to reduce weight, so I want to begin intermittent fasting today. You wait for 14 days, let that quarantine be over, then you do whatever you want. Don't play around with the metabolism and the immunity so much. So I think that kind of a in between, Buddha's middle path kind of an answer we can give all our patients and community. We have a question for Dr. Jatin, and this comes from Dr. Vinny. Is there any role of CD3 and CD4 count in COVID-19 patients? That's one question.
Sir, I think more than 10 patients so far I have seen over the last 1 year, and since I started looking after this COVID. So I have been seeing that the patient who are having these severe COVID, and those who have received the steroids for around 2 weeks, they are the one who have the both B cell as well as T cell defect, which is quite commonly is being seen. One is in the form of the hypogammaglobulinemia. We are seeing that IgG and IgM quite commonly seen, less in this kind of patients. And the other thing is the CD4. So there are certain couple of papers also. Yesterday I was looking after that. So CD4 CD8 ratio, it's a always in the 2:1 ratio. So it's a reversal ratio quite commonly seen in the severe COVID, and it's one of the bad prognostic marker also in terms of superadded opportunistic infections. We have more than 10 patients so far as of now.
So this is a prognostic marker, a risk stratification marker to be done only in severely ill patients in the ICU. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So patients who are critically ill and who have received the steroids, who are on oxygen dependent and have the lymphopenia, absolute lymphocyte count of less than 500. Those are the one, if you look at the AG ratio is also been, I would say,
Reversed or changed? Yes, albumin globulin ratio changes
it's
and
not reversed.
CD3.
It's been I would say it's almost constant because albumin is already low and the globulin is in the same way getting also low. So those are the one which we go for the IgG, A and M. IgA usually comes normal in most of the patients. G and M, which are the our for the immunity, intravascular immunity, they are the one which comes low, and we need to supplement with the IVIG sometimes to immune patient who are having frank sepsis, not responding with the
Yeah.
higher antibiotic
So what
also.
is the treatment? What is the therapeutic implication of this test?
So far we don't have any enough data, so
Therapy.
we are treating with like a and typical HIV positive patient who are having CD4 of 53, CD4 of 80. So what we do is that we need to first rule out the super opportunistic infections. Once the opportunistic infections are being ruled out, or they are treated based on the whether it's a nocardia or CMV or whatever it is, then we need to start the antibiotic on as a prophylactic therapy, like patient who are having the CD4 less than 100.
Okay.
You need to
So
start
you
on the
become
Septran,
super, yeah,
cotrimazole, to
you
prevent
become super
nocardia,
cautious. Yeah.
nocardia and the PCP pneumonia. Quite common with this kind of patients, pneumocystis pneumonia. So we
So
are
this count, CD3, CD4 count, this can be used for risk stratification. It has a prognostic significance.
yes.
It does have some sort of a therapeutic significance in the sense that you become more proactive. Does it have any nursing significance? Barrier nursing, or do the nursing personnel have to take extra care in such patients?
Definitely that they are the one who hampered by the both these line defects like the B cell as well as T cell defect. So just like I would say SID, severe combined immunodeficiency patients, they are the one who have both the B and T cell line defect, are the one who can catch infection either in the form of mucosa, and that is through GI, or it can be from the respiratory route. So we have to be a little more cautious, especially if we talk
Nursing
about
as
the
well.
intensive care is concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. This, as an endocrinologist, this, like in endocrinology, we speak of sick euthyroid syndrome. You don't have to treat with thyroxine, sick euthyroid syndrome, but you are aware that it exists, and you just have to ensure that you build up the immunity of the patient, get the patient out of the ICU fast, increase protein count. This seems to me to be like a sick lymphocyte syndrome.
Totally,
Would
yes.
that be a fair analogy, Dr. Jatin, Dr. Vinny?
Sick lymphocyte, I would not say, sir. It's definitely a pathology, and we have to be, cautious in terms of as a prophylactic therapy. If the patient is not having the other added infection, like nocardia is not there, PCP is
Right.
not there, then we have to be cautious and start with the prophylactic therapy.
Prophylactic therapy. So,
Yeah.
so in sick euthyroid syndrome, there's not too much of a therapeutic implication, but here there is more.
Absolutely.
Dr. Jatin, you had spoken of CMV just now, a few minutes
Yes.
ago. So another question for you from Dr. Kantru. If CMV is positive in post-COVID patients, what should be our approach for therapy? Can you give the full form of CMV also and then continue with the answer?
So cytomegalovirus, it is a CMV cytomegalovirus. It is one of the virus of the herpes viridae family, and they are the one which are already present in our body. I would say, if I talk about the Indian population, most of the Indian population, 95% seroprevalence, it's a positivity rate is there. We acquired CMV starting from the childhood. By the time we reach the 5 years of age, we acquired this cytomegalovirus. And if any of us go for the IgG, cytomegalovirus, that will going to come in the positive form. But that doesn't mean that we have the active virus replication. So
Right.
if the patient who is post-COVID or during the COVID bombarded with the steroids and antibiotics, high blood sugars, and other immunocompromised states, so the virus get reactivated. So all the herpes virus has the tendency to get latent infection. So acquired in the childhood, get reactivated in the adult population during the immunocompromised state, and then lead to the end organ dysfunction. So basically, what we are seeing is the cytomegalovirus, replicating, multiplying in the blood and causing the end organ, mainly in the liver, transaminitis, in the lung, pneumonitis, and really it can cause the renal injury sometimes, and the encephalitis part also.
Okay. Are you seeing an epidemic of herpes zoster as well? And do you feel that there will be more chickenpox in children or even in adults? Will there be more chickenpox after COVID?
Sir, so I have seen recently one of the father of one of my batchmate. So he is having the zoster over the one thoracic dermatome. Along with that, he is having the viremia also, CMV viremia, with the copies of 54,000. So I have been treating with the ganciclovir because ganciclovir more of the cytomegalovirus action, but to some extent it covers the zoster part also. So although for zoster we give the either the acyclovir or valacyclovir or it's a famciclovir, different group is there. But since patient is having the both the disease, so we are treating with that also. Another common infection which we are seeing it, one of the patient from Dr. Kandru only we have seen, that is the herpes simplex infection. The patient who is having the refractory oral ulcer, not responding with the this oral thrush, we label it as oral thrush when we see that patient is having the severe oral ulcer, but not responding with the antifungus from fluconazole to voriconazole, and then we keep on escalating to posaconazole. So those are the one with refractory oral ulcer. Should we go for the HSV1 and 2 PCR? And most of the time they turned out to be positive. It's again the kind of reactivation in the oropharyngeal region, leading to esophagitis, gingivostomatitis, sometimes in the genital area also.
Okay. So you spoke of high sugars, high glucose levels, and let's take all these questions together. Dr. Geeta Kumari asks about diabetes and post-COVID syndrome. Dr. Jamuna Rani asks about dietary advice for weight loss and any drug which is a fat burner. And then Dr. Kangana Sabhai Venugopal, Dr. Venugopal asks about difference between glycemic index and glycemic load. Dr. Jennifer continues the discussion with any special diet for COVID patients who have diabetes and hypertension. So all the metabolic things put together, Dr. Jennifer, Dr. Venugopal, and Dr. Jamna and Dr. Geeta Kumari are asking. Shilpa, if you could take these general principles, please. And just there was one question from Dr. Deborai that was regarding vaccination. So actually people with diabetes and hypertension, they should preferentially get they should be in the first phase of vaccination. Actually, they are a priority group because they are at high risk. People with diabetes are at high risk of developing severe COVID, especially uncontrolled diabetes. So we should actually take them up for vaccination first, earlier than their other peers. So Dr. Shilpa, please.
First I'll take diabetes and hypertension. So it's very important that, there is a diet pattern called as DASH, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And I think that is one of the best dietary patterns where you are reducing salt intake. And that I don't mean go salt free, I mean 5 grams of salt a day. That is 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon of salt per day per person. Diet which is rich in vegetables, fruits, pulses, so on and so forth. Even for non-vegetarians, minimum amount of non-vegetarian food, that is important. It is very important for patients in diabetes to monitor their sugars. You are never going to know what is happening after eating something unless you monitor it. So, people come to us with खुद ही बोल के आते हैं कि मैडम हमको ग्लूटेन फ्री डाइट चाहिए क्योंकि हमारी शुगर बढ़ रही है, कुछ ग्लूटेन से होता नहीं है, but still they want a gluten free diet. So these are things which there are a lot of myths going around through the WhatsApp University and Google University and all of that. So most of the nutrients you will realize don't do anything. Most of the foods don't do anything as long as there is a strict portion control. I think the name of the game is how much to eat and what to eat both. But more than what to eat, it is how much to eat. So portion control is very important in both the cases, in management of hypertension and in management of diabetes. That's the first thing. Second thing, somebody asked about glycemic index and glycemic load. Now, glycemic index is the property of X amount of food to rise the blood glucose. So difference between two foods having varied glycemic indexes, say you compare it with sugar as compared to wheat. So sugar will rise blood glucose much faster as compared to wheat, and therefore sugar has a higher glycemic index than wheat. Glycemic load takes into account even the amount of carbohydrate in that food. So glycemic load is about portion size. The most common example given is chocolate candy. जैसे eclair hai ya a piece of Cadbury's Dairy Milk or something like that, that has a very low glycemic index, 55. But the amount of carbohydrate in that chocolate is a lot. So the glycemic load is very high. As opposed to that, a piece of watermelon has a higher glycemic index. It's 75. But the amount of carbohydrate in watermelon is very low. So glycemic index is very low. So it's very important that food should have a lower glycemic load to get a lower postprandial rise. That's very, very important. So glycemic load also talks about portion size and amount of carbohydrate in the food. So these were two questions that I remember. I don't remember other questions.
The other ones were obesity and diabetes. So just some general rules.
Obesity and diabetes, the general rule is weight loss will always help you to control your sugars better. So we have seen, through various studies that 5 to 10% weight loss actually improves blood sugar control and even can cause diabetes remission. So try, it's very important that individuals lose weight. And we also see the same effect in hypertension. When people lose weight, their blood pressures actually do better. So for weight loss, it is very important. First of all, I just wanted to clarify, in weight loss, you don't have to eat every 2 hours. There's nothing like कि हर 2 घंटे में खाया तो weight loss होता है and BMR increases. That's not true. So as long as you can control the net calories is the name of the game. So net calories have to be lower than what you're taking now. So 2 ways: you reduce calories, you increase physical activity, both help. Composition of diet is very important. We are increasingly seeing diets which are lower in carbohydrate and fat cause weight loss faster than those which are higher in carbohydrates and fats. And fats, everybody knows, because calorie to calorie, fats have much more calories as compared to gram to gram. They have much more calories as compared to carbohydrates and proteins. But people abuse carbohydrates, and therefore decreasing amount of carbohydrate in diet reduces hunger and therefore helps you to maintain weight much faster. So eating more proteins and lesser carbohydrates always help. When I mean lesser carbohydrate, I definitely do not mean carb free. So this is another myth. This is the whole other side of the pendulum, where it swings right there. So I'm not saying carb free. I'm just saying lower in carbohydrates.
So I think follow the middle path, follow the path of Lord Buddha, that is moderation, in everything, not only in diet, but also in investigations, also in management. That is a general rule for COVID-19. And you find that when you swing to an extreme end of the pendulum, whether in terms of investigations, then you get into trouble. You get incidentalomas, you get values which you begin chasing while actually they had no clinical significance. If you begin over-treating, whether with kadhas or with food supplements, you end up giving too much of iron, too much of zinc, then you get in trouble, too much of vitamin C. And Dr. Vinny Kantru raises this important point that we shouldn't let our guard down. Post-COVID also, you have to be careful. You have to be careful for food, for nutrition. You have to give food which builds the immunity, give high protein diet. She also reminds us that if post-COVID, somebody comes back with a recurrence of fever coming back after the patient has recovered from COVID, then you have to check CD3, CD4, and you have to rule out opportunistic infections. Like Dr. Jatin mentioned, herpes simplex is something that you may want to search for. We have more and more questions. So Dr. Jatin, there was this question for you. What is D-dimer? Everybody is speaking about D-dimer. So what is D-dimer? Why do we get it done in COVID?
D-dimer, sir, basically it's when the patient is having the increased clotting tendency, it's a kind of protein which forms during the clot formation and then formation and the breakdown. The D-dimer values get raised, and based on that, we need to know that whether the patient is having the pro-clotting tendency or it's a normal, or balance equilibrium is there between the clotting and the clot lysis. So whenever there is an equilibrium, the D-dimer value is always within the normal range. But whenever there is a pro-clotting tendency is there, the D-dimer value gets raised. So it's a kind of a degradation product based on the increased clotting part of the body. So it's a very costly investigation. Most of the centers are doing it at a cost of more than 2,000 rupees per test. And even me also, I would say, writing it is go for CRP, LDH, and D-dimer. So on a patient who is, I would talk about who is not needing it and unnecessary, we are writing it, and a patient will have to pay 5,000 rupees on an average per test. And if a patient is having the illness of at least 2 weeks, he has to go after every third to fourth day. And based on that, we need to, balance it with our anti-clotting medication or anti-coagulants like anti-10A, fondaparinux by injectable or by oral anticoagulants in the form of Pixaban or Rivaroxaban. There are certain medications which are available in the markets. But definitely, yes, it's not a marker of the pro-arterial clotting tendency. It's a marker of the pro-clotting tendency, irrespective whether it's arterial or it's a venous. So that's why there is the role of the anticoagulants, not the role of the antiplatelets. Yeah.
So let me try to explain this in Hindi for everybody. जब हम हिंदी में बात करते हैं खून पतला होने की या खून गाढ़ा होने की, उसमें बहुत सारी चीजें आती हैं. जो हिंदी का लफ्ज है खून गाढ़ा होना या खून पतला होना, उसमें इंग्लिश में कम से कम 4 पहलू आ जाएंगे. नंबर 1, हीमोग्लोबिन. किसी का खून कम हो सकता है, ज्यादा हो सकता है. किसी का हीमोग्लोबिन 16, 17, 18 हो, that can be polycythemia. In Hindi that will be said as खून गाढ़ा है. सेकंड इज कोलेस्ट्रॉल. किसी का कोलेस्ट्रॉल नॉर्मल है तो आपका खून ठीक है, बट अगर आपका कोलेस्ट्रॉल 250 या 300 आ गया, ट्राइग्लिसराइड 400 या 500 आ गए, देन ऑल्सो द डॉक्टर विल टेल यू कि आपका खून गाढ़ा है, उसमें चर्बी ज्यादा है, वो गाढ़ा हो गया. सेकंड पहलू. थर्ड वन इज व्हाट डॉक्टर जतिन अलूडेड टू जस्ट नाउ. जब किसी को हार्ट अटैक या अधरंग की बीमारी होती है तो ज्यादातर क्या होता है, खून की नसों में काई जम जाती है. इन द ब्लड वेसल्स, ऑन द वॉल्स ऑफ द ब्लड वेसल्स, यू हैव दिस काई or this slime. The slime can be sugar, it can be tobacco, it can be cholesterol. जब ये काई जम जाती है, whether it is tobacco or sugar or cholesterol, तो काई के पीस गिरने के चांस होते हैं. There is a chance always that this cholesterol that is stuck to the walls of the blood vessels, it can always break off, right? When this breaks off, this is called a thrombus. When this thrombus circulates in the blood, if it is circulating quietly and happily, there's no issue. But it might break up into small bits and pieces. These are called emboli or embolus. And if this embolus goes and gets stuck in a tiny blood vessel in the brain, it will cause a brain attack. Adhrang ho sakta hai. If it goes and gets stuck in the heart, it will cause a heart attack. It can also go and get stuck in the legs, and it can cause gangrene of the legs. And it can go and get stuck in the intestine, then that will cause gangrene of the intestine. ये हो गया तीसरा पहलू. चौथा पहलू है जो डॉक्टर जतिन बोल रहे थे अबाउट चेकिंग द डी डाइमर एंड चेकिंग फॉर कोएगुलेशन. नाउ इन आवर बॉडी वी हैव ब्लड. ब्लड इज लिक्विड, लिक्विड की तरह चलता है. सो अगेन हरियाणा पंजाब एनालॉजी, जिस तरह से आप खेत में आप इरिगेशन करते हैं, पानी देते हैं, आप चाहते हैं कि पानी एंड तक पहुंचे. द वाटर शुड रीच द लास्ट फील्ड फॉर इरिगेशन. बट सपोजिंग द वाटर इज टू फ्लूइड, बिल्कुल पानी पानी है, तो मान लो चोट लग गई आपको, देन व्हाट विल हैपन? चोट लगेगी यहाँ पे, बट यू विल कीप ऑन ब्लीडिंग एंड देन लाइफ में बी एट रिस्क. दिस इज व्हाट हैपेंस इन सम कोएगुलेशन डिसऑर्डर्स. सो व्हाट द बॉडी डज इज देयर इज अ हीमोस्टैसिस. हीमोस्टैसिस क्या होता है? जब मुझे चोट लगेगी, सबसे पहले खून की नसें सिकुड़ जाएंगी. सो लेट अस से आई गॉट एन इंजरी हियर. द फर्स्ट स्टेप इज दैट माय ब्लड वेसल्स विल कंस्ट्रिक्ट so that less blood reaches here. At the same time, a message goes to my platelets that I've been hurt in my finger. So my platelets come running, the gray cells come running, and they try to block this. But alone they can't block because everything is just pouring out. So what happens is the coagulation factors come into play. Coagulation factors आते हैं और वो एक जाल बनाते हैं. they make a mesh work, they make a framework. बिल्कुल ऐसे ही जैसे आप घर बनाएंगे तो सरिये का जाल बिछता है. You make a जाल or a meshwork of iron rods or steel rods. In that you put the cement. In that you put the bricks, the mortar, and then you build a strong house. So this meshwork is made of coagulation factors. They create something called thrombin. Thrombin creates this meshwork. In that my gray cells, the platelets are able to come and stick, and they're able to save me from excessive bleeding. Now, this is homeostasis. This is good for health. It is hemostasis. But supposing it becomes too much, and in my blood, Suddenly, I find that the coagulation factors decide to go for a bhangra party. They decide to go for a rave party and they begin creating a mesh. A mesh gets created somewhere in my blood vessels. The mesh is circulating happily ever after in the blood vessels. In that, the platelets get stuck. While they were going through the blood, maybe a little bit of cholesterol, little bit of tobacco deposit also came and got stuck. Then, Dr. Jatin, what happens in COVID-19? So we have this picture now, and this circulating grenade. It's circulating. What happens which pulls the trigger from the grenade? What happens in COVID-19?
So as been told, sir, you have, I think, very nicely explained the chapter 2 of Robbins way back, which I have read it many years back. The virtuous triad, the hypercoagulability, and the stasis, all those things. So I would say the patient is already having the hyperinflammation in the COVID. As we see that in the first week, it's a viremic phase. As the second week enters, there is a hyperinflammatory response is there. So when the hyperinflammatory response is there, the D-dimer gets shoot up. So I have 2 patients in the first wave. I haven't encountered in the second wave in the form of similar illness. In the first wave, I have seen 2 patients presented like an IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. Patient already having the fever and started having the bloody diarrhea. So I was having in the mind that yes, this patient having the inflammatory bowel disease. So I have given him started on the steroids, but not thinking it as a COVID positive patient, but thinking it as a IBD, inflammatory. It could be a relapse or new onset of the ulcerative colitis. But later on, when I went for the CT angiography or triple phase CT, I realized that it's a mesenteric venous thrombosis is there. So from that, I learned that it's better to spend money on the D-dimer instead of then landing up in that massive bleed.
So basically what happens in COVID-19, it is a pro-inflammatory state. Inflammation means सूजन. कहीं पे भी हो सकती है. It can happen in the thyroid gland, it can happen in the brain, it can happen in the lungs. But if it happens in the blood vessels, in the lining of the blood vessels, so already you have this time bomb circulating, these multiple frameworks of thrombin and platelets. And on top of that, if there is inflammation in the blood vessels, that can actually cause more thrombi to form. And if they break up and become emboli, then you get in trouble. So D-dimer is done to screen for such a situation so that you can treat properly with anticoagulants. So खून पतला करने वाली दवाई हो सकती है anti-cholesterol, anti-platelet, anticoagulant, but here anticoagulant has to be given. Dr. Jatin, suppose I'm working in a primary healthcare center somewhere in the interior of the country. I don't have access to D-dimer. What is the cheapest test that I can get done just to monitor my patient for coagulation? Something I can do in the lab myself, just with a tissue paper, with a blotting paper.
So BTCT that you can do, bleeding time and the clotting time, or even the thrombin time cannot be done because thrombin time still requires the skill and the test and machine. But still, I would say that that will be a crude marker for the this increased D-dimer.
It will be very crude, but if you have nothing else to fall back on and you are in a primary healthcare center, you are taking the best possible care of your patients. You can at least screen them with a bleeding time and clotting time. At least that will tell you which patients you have to refer to the civil hospital and which you can keep with yourself.
So in that also, I would say the clotting time would be, clotting and thrombin time would be more attributable to this increased D-dimer instead of the bleeding time, which is more attributing to the in terms of pro-platelet activity, not a pro-clotting tendency, pro-platelet activity, bleeding time.
Right. Okay, so that point is well taken. So just like we were explaining just now, platelets are different, coagulation factors are different. They work together, but they are different. So that's what Dr. Jatin is saying, that D-dimer will talk more about the coagulation profile and bleeding time will talk more about the platelet activity. Yeah. Dr. Gail Chaudhary has a question for you, Dr. Jatin, if you can take, please. As family physicians, when should we start oral anticoagulants in COVID-19 situation?
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. So basically in every patients of COVID, and we don't require to start on the anticoagulants. So small rise in the D-dimer is well taken care by the good amount of hydration. If we take care of the hydration part, the slight elevation, suppose the cutoff is about 500 nanogram per ml and the patient is having the D-dimer of 700 or 800, it can be easily taken up by the good amount of hydration, because dehydration itself causes rise in the D dimer, and it has a tendency to cause more clot formation, dehydration. So good amount of hydration is first thing. Second thing is, if the patient is having the serial rise in the D dimer, suppose it's getting more than 3 times elevation, so that's the time when we have to start on the prophylactic dose of the anticoagulants. So prophylactic dose for the oral is something different, and the subcutaneous anticoagulants is something different. So we have to be cautious if there is a more than 3 times of the upper limit of normal of D dimer is there. But yes, if it is elevating more than 5 times, and then at that time you have to be cautious in terms of starting the therapeutic doses. Definitely you have to be titrate and the bleeding tendency part. But yes, more than 5 times it has to be therapeutic dose, but more than 3 times it has to be prophylactic dose.
Right. Thank you. I think that's a very clear-cut answer, a very straightforward answer, which has brought clarity to this subject. We've already crossed 1 hour and 30 minutes. We never realized the time. So let's move on to happier questions. But before that, Mehrooq Ishfaq ji says that if you have gastric ulcers, then the suggested diet is actually a bland diet, small frequent meals. Is that correct, Shilpa?
Yes, but yeah, I'm not on. Yes,
Yeah.
it's small frequent meal, but not completely bland. You can still use turmeric. You can still use lot of spices which are not very sharp. So don't use lal mirch and hari mirch and garam masala, but you can just use maybe salt and pepper. Pepper is not that sharp, and don't use a lot of it. You can use very little quantity of it, and you can use other spices as well. But not everybody gets bothered with every single spice. So typically what we see is green chilies, red chilies are the biggest culprits. And that's what our Indian cooking is based on. Sukhi mircha, hari mirch is what our cooking is based on. And as long as you can avoid that, lot of times it works very well.
You can tell your patient, Mehrooq ji, to keep a food diary, which are the foods which trouble him or her. So let us say the patient came and said, जब मैं भिंडी खाता हूँ मुझे दिक्कत आती है. Whenever I eat lady finger, I get a problem. Then what you tell him is, on a good day, on a happy day, why don't you eat boiled lady finger, boiled bhindi without any spices at all? See what happens. And that will tell you whether it is the food which is causing the allergy or the gastritis, or maybe a spice that was being used in it. Because in most kitchens, the lady will have a different spice for each vegetable, for each food. This also partly answers your question about swelling in the feet and hands and face after walking or after eating. Usually it will not be, if the swelling is coming only intermittently, it usually will not be because of nutrition deficiency. However, in people with low protein, if they have prolonged sitting, right, then you will find that they get swelling in the feet. So the first thing you should look for from a nutrition point of view is protein sufficiency. Also, it might be angioedema. There might be allergy. It might be allergy to the cold air. It might be allergy to a spice. So again, we need to keep a diary to see what is happening. And if the swelling is occurring after a walk, not only a food diary for what you ate before you went for a walk, but also what season it is. It might be the season for wheat harvest. It might be the season for mustard harvest, and that might be causing the allergy. So these are the social things, the environmental things that you have to find. We have a listener with us, Meena Rajoria ji, and she has मेरी दुखती रग छेड़ दिया शिल्पा इन्होंने. Now what do I do? Genes are responsible for weight loss. That is true. There are people who eat a lot and never gain. They are so lucky, like Dr. Jatin. And there are people who don't eat at all and they gain weight. That is like me. You know what, Meena? Last year I did intermittent fasting. After 18 days, I gained 400 grams. So I stopped. Then this year I got COVID. And Dr. Vinny Kantru and Dr. Jatin Ahuja took very good care of me. They took so much good care of me that at the end of COVID, I had gained 5 kg. And all my other friends, they laughed and laughed at me. They said, ये भी कोई COVID हुआ, बाकी सबका तो 10 किलो 12 किलो weight कम हो गया. Everybody lost 10-12 kg and you are the only one. So then I coined a new term and it's called CRAT, C-R-A-T. Actually, Jatin thinks I'm a brat, B-R-A-T, but he is polite because he's junior. So C-R-A-T is COVID resistant adipose tissue. And I know only 3 people in the world who have COVID resistant adipose tissue. One is me, and then 2 of my patients. So I was so depressed after getting COVID because I thought at least there would be one silver lining that I would lose weight. That didn't happen. And then I would talk to all my patients. So everybody would come back with COVID. Daksa, we had COVID and the doctors took good care of us. Now we are back. Now you take care of our sugars. And all of them would have lost 4, 6, 10, 12 kg. So then 2 ladies, one was 106 kg. She came and said, doctor, I got COVID and my weight didn't come down. I was so happy. I wanted to hug her. I said, you and I are the only people. But it's not allowed socially in the OPD. So I didn't do that also. And also she was 106 kg. She was heavier than me. So supposing, if she got angry, then I would have got bashed up. So, and then another lady, she's a relative of mine. She also had CRAT, CRAT. So that's 3 of us in the whole world. So Meena, sabki kismat hoti hai alag-alag. So we are 3 people out of 8 billion. So
one of your relatives, so means its genes play a role.
So maybe Meena is the 4th person. I don't know. I'm not sure. But let's end on a happy note. So for Dr. Jatin first, last question for you, please. Can you give some tips for us? How can we come out of COVID-19 in a happy and healthy manner?
So in that context, I would say that ma'am, Dr. Shilpa already talked about the nutrition and the food part, and the second part is the rehabilitation part, and the first, which I can offer to everyone, is the medicine part. So MRF, medicine, early diagnosis and medicine treatment. Second is the rehabilitation, whether it's a post-COVID lung rehabilitation or post-COVID any limb rehabilitation. And the third part is the food or nutritional part. So MRF, by these 3 means we can take care of every patient, whether it's a mild, moderate or severe disease.
Good food, good rehabilitation. Take medicines as advised by your doctor, and don't fear, don't be afraid. We'll all come out of it. Shilpa ji, last comment from you before we hand back to Paromita Das ji and to Project Eco team. So what is culinary happiness? Because Mayura Behle asks us, can you give us some tips so that we can make healthy food, happy food for our children and for all of us? So what is the concept of culinary happiness? Can we end on this note? Can we end on a happy note today?
So first of all, I think it's very important that we understand what is good food. So everything that comes out of kadai is not good. Food is something which is also not fried and not excessively sweetened. So I think our generation is gone, but I think that younger generation, we need to train them about what is good eating. It just does not. इंडिया में वही माँ अच्छी होती है जो गाजर का हलवा बना के खिलाती है, वो माँ अच्छी नहीं होती जो केला देती है, आम देती है खाने. So I think the social norms have to change around food. So whenever typically women come and tell me my kids get very hungry at 4 o'clock, what do I give? And I tell them, give a fruit, and they'll be like, हाँ वो तो हम देते हैं, पर खाने क्या दे? Fruit is food, right? Food is also fruit. I mean, fruit is also food. So I think these social norms, or eating a cucumber is eating food. So that's important to know. Second thing, I think using various aspects of food. So it is not just the taste, but the sound, the texture, the feel, the hand feel, the mouth feel. Everything is important while eating. So like, typically in COVID, you lose your taste of sense of taste and smell. Then you can use other aspect like a crunch of a papad or a softness of the rice or a sharpness of something. I think that's very important that you use food in all aspects. Another thing, I do not know if it is the right forum. It's a very social issue that people should start looking at food as cooking food as a necessity. If you can cook food, you will start appreciating food. जिनको थाली में वैसे ही खाना मिलता है, उसको उसका कोई importance नहीं होता. So because then they have 100 things to complain and then they are never happy. So I think the social barometer here is even men in India should start cooking. And I'm not saying becoming chefs or Sanjeev Kapoor. I'm just saying if you know how to make dal chawal, you'll appreciate the dal chawal that comes on your plate, and that leads to a lot of happiness. Because you should be able to enjoy the food that you're eating, and you should be able to feel grateful for what you're eating. So like I said, happiness, gratefulness, using of all senses while eating, and not just the taste, but all the senses. Food should also look pretty, right? In India, we play a very little emphasis on that. If you see MasterChef competition, plating holds like 10% of the grades. And I think that is something India mein koi sochta hi nahi hai. You take the kadai and you put it on the table. and then that makes the food boring. So I think all these things come together, but most important thing I perceive is gratefulness while eating, because that's where happiness comes from.
So that is the concept of culinary happiness and mindful eating. Jatin and I will take you up on that. And actually at home, I'm considered a better cook because the reason is very rarely I cook. But supposing I have to make an omelette for my children. So now my wife, she can do it with the minimum amount of ghee or oil. And if I have to make it, even if it's a non-sticky pan, I just put in dollops of butter or ghee. And then obviously the omelette comes out tastier. And my kids say, Papa is a very good cook. So we should be able to cook, but we should cook. We should be able to cook with parsimony, with the minimum amount of cooking oil, with the minimum amount of spices, while giving good taste. So with that, thanks a lot, Shilpa. Thank you, Jatin. We've learned today about nutrition. We've learned about uh, investigations and management of COVID. And I think we've also learned about how to just be with each other. We've learned about fellowship. We've learned how we can just get together with each other and actually fight all these issues that are coming with COVID, and we can come out of it as a country, as a nation. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I'll hand the mic back to Paromita.
Thank you, Dr. Kalra. I mean, Dr. Kalra, Shilpa ma'am, and Dr. Jatin. I think this is one of the best sessions we had so far. And Shilpa ma'am just wanted to add that being a Bengali, we are so fascinated with fish that I keep frying my fish. Now I know what needs to be done and what not needs to be done. So keeping everything in mind, I would just want to say everyone that we have posted the feedback link. So kindly share it, kindly give us your feedback, so that it's very important for us and even for the speakers. So thank you once again, everyone. And of course, the participants, you have been extremely patient with us. So our next series is on the 10th of June, where Dr. Sangeeta Sharma would be talking on antibiotics and misuse in COVID-19. The timing would be same. So thank you and good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
sir.
Bye.
Good
Thanks.
night,
Thank
sir.
you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, good
Bye.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Bala.
ma'am. Thank you so much.
Bye.